welcome. I am Jane Brennan, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Central Delaware County. On behalf of the League, I welcome all of you and thank you for joining us for our 6th Hot Topic program for the 2021-2022 year. As many of you know, prior to the pandemic, our Hot Topic programs were luncheons with guest speakers. But since the pandemic, we have had primarily Zoom presentations, with this past year an occasional foray into a live program. We have been both delighted and amazed by the very positive response we have gotten to having these programs by Zoom. As of earlier today, we had 39 people registered for this program. I want to remind everybody that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan civic organization committed to promoting political responsibility through informed and active participation in government, citizenship, and elections. Our motto is making democracy work, and we do that through registering people to vote, organizing and presenting candidate forums, providing candidate information through vote411.org, and hosting educational programs such as today's Hot Topic program entitled The Journey for Equal Rights for Women. Since Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the proposed Equal Rights Amendment in 2020, there has been renewed interest and activity with regard to advocating to Congress incorporating the amendment into the Constitution. Before we begin, a few housekeeping details for the Zoom meeting. All of the participants except the guest speakers, the moderators, and our technological wizard, Kathy Youngman, will be muted. The questions submitted prior to today have been shared with the speaker. Additional questions may be submitted through the chat function, and I will act as moderator for the Q&A. And now to introduce our speakers. Laurie Grant has been the Executive Director of the Delaware County Historical Society for 4+ years. Ms. Grant brings 25+ years of nonprofit leadership with her, serving in many different fields. Her leadership skills have been honed from working in the arts and culture arena, to the progressive education arena, to the higher education arena, as Vice President of the Delaware Law School and the Commonwealth Law School, to the environmental arena, where she was instrumental in getting 16 municipalities in Montgomery County to sign an intergovernmental agreement to work together, share resources, and clean up the Wissahickon Creek. Laurie's professional niche is leading struggling nonprofits through the changes necessary to become relevant in today's world, while remaining loyal to the organization's original mission. This includes rebuilding the institution's infrastructure, branding, and financial sustainability. Our second speaker, Paul Hughes Jr., is the Outreach Associate for the Delaware County Historical Society and has been there since June of 2021. Paul is currently a graduate student in history at Temple University. His fieldwork is primarily in the 20th century cultural history with a minor in religious studies. And most impressive, Mr. Hughes is a 12th generation resident of Delaware County. I don't think I can trace my family back 12 generations, and has lived and worked in the county most of his life. And without further ado, I turn the program over to Laurie and Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Hello to all members of the League of Women's Voters. I think after this presentation, I'd like to inquire a little bit about how to join the organization, because your mission is certainly something that is important, has a sense of urgency right now in today's world, and I would, really enjoy furthering your cause. Paul is going to stay without video today because he has his 3-year-old son in his office because the daycare facility closed due to COVID. Not that his son has COVID, but they closed. So He's here, he's listening, he's working behind the scenes, doing his magic, but he's not going to show himself today. I do want to let you know that we have become very dependent on Paul. He is really knowledgeable about history and specifically local history. And as Jane said, a 12th generation member of the county. Delaware County, just very briefly, is a very interesting county with 49 different municipalities, townships, boroughs, whatever you want to call them, all with their own sort of distinct personality and identity and voting persuasions. So I think now what you're going to hear is an edited version. What we're presenting for you today is an edited version of a virtual program that Delaware County Historical Society provided to the public a few months ago during Women's History Month. We will hear from two constitutional lawyers from Delaware law, Professor James May and Professor Alicia Kelly. In addition, we will hear from a local common pleas judge, the Honorable Linda Cardizano, who is a judge here in Delaware County. And then briefly, we will hear from Representative Joanna McClinton from Harrisburg. We did receive some questions prior to today's presentation, which we have done a little research and spoken to constitutional lawyers to get the best answers we can. And I understand Jane will be taking questions from a chat as well. I don't know if you like to have the questions at the end, questions and answers at the end, and let us just play this video. And then, because some of the questions that I see will be answered in that video. You will hear me every once in a while say pause, and that is cueing Paul to stop the video so I can say something. Does that format sound okay?
Yeah, Jane's muted, so I saw her shake her head, yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
So,
I had a workman here.
Paul, would you like to share the screen, please, of the video? And I hope you enjoy. I hope you have your lunch with you and enjoy our video.
Thank you.
Going to do an overview of what we're going to talk about, and then Professor May and I are going to kind of take turns doing parts of the talk. We're going to talk just a little bit about a glimpse of gender inequality today with a few examples. We're going to talk about a brief history of treatment of women in the United States Constitution and give some examples. We're going to talk about the potential impacts of having an ERA, like what's the point of having an ERA, what's it going to do, potentially why is it so valuable to support and to try to get it passed finally, and then talk about where we are today in the process of hopefully achieving adoption of an ERA on the federal level, and then we're going to talk in a pretty brief way about our experience in the journey to the ERA in the state of Delaware. So gender inequality is still with us. I know this is probably not news to many people in the room, and so here's just some very quick examples. Pervasive violence against women across the world, female infanticide, honor killings, female genital mutilation, being forbidden to drive or travel, restrictions on clothing, lack of legal rights, including protection against rape. And here's some examples closer to home, some more of the issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis in the United States. And that is also pervasive violence against women, including rape, sex abuse, domestic violence, discrimination in many places, including and especially the workplace, sexual harassment, employment discrimination, pregnancy discrimination, caregiver discrimination. there's actually a whole new arena of law about trying to prevent or have some remedy for caregiver discrimination, because it's often very much gendered, because very often women are the caregivers. And then economic resource inequality, including women having much higher rates of poverty than men, and then the gender pay gap, which I'm sure everybody's heard lots about. It's still here. It's still pretty much the same place as it's been in the last 20 years. Inadequate social safety net, lack of work family supports like paid family leave. And of course, we've been thinking about all this. It's with us every day in the media with the Me Too movement. A couple of years ago, there was a big victory declared in The Economist that women became more than half of the workforce, but that has not at all achieved women's equality for many reasons. Here's just a very quick chart on the pay gap. You can see that it's also much more exaggerated based on race and ethnicity. So it's in about an 80% gap in wages between men and women working full-time at the same jobs. And then it gets much, much worse for Black and African American women and Hispanic and Latinas especially. So that's just a little backdrop on kind of where we are today. And the ARA can play a role in trying to combat some of these inequalities. So James, I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy.
There isn't a constitutional right to equal rights under the federal constitution, but there is in most of the world. So of the world's 7.5 billion inhabitants, about 5.5 billion live in countries that guarantee equal rights. That doesn't mean that equal rights are actually provided, but that there's constitutional protection, as you can see, in the vast majority of the UN recognized countries. Next slide, please, Alicia. But in the US, it's different. We just have this. So if everyone can just take a look at it, this is what we have. We have the 14th Amendment, which provides that nor shall a state deprive any person of equal protection under the law. So that was enacted in 1868, and it was not designed to provide equal rights for women. Next slide, please. But it's where our Constitution stands. And fast forwarding about a century, we see that in most instances, up to the last couple of decades in the United States, that the Supreme Court and lower courts virtually almost always upheld gender differentiation. That is, governmental laws that differentiated based on gender. One of the most notable situations that applying to the law is Myra Bradwell, who's an activist and a journalist and just a brilliant human being, and who applied to get a law license in Illinois, and Illinois didn't allow women to practice law. And she challenged that. The Supreme Court upheld that. And that was 1872. But even after World War II, when women played such a huge role in the war effort, after the war subsided, society went back to gender-based stereotypes, like not permitting women to be bartenders if the state wanted to prohibit that, or not permitting women to serve on juries if the state permitted that, or seek divorce, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So gender differentiation was upheld. And that's because of this weird constitutional construct, everybody, that the Constitution doesn't really say, it doesn't really mean what it says. It really it provides a framework for giving deference to courts, and how much, how much deference courts should give the government when the government differentiates based on gender. And there's the three different standards of review, they're called. And in 30 seconds, let me tell you what it boils down to, is that when the government differentiates based upon a so-called suspect class, that's the terminology in constitutional law, that on race or alienage or national origin, then the government has to have a really, really good reason to do so. So it can, but it needs a really good reason. That's strict scrutiny. Everything else is rational basis review, meaning if it's reasonable, then the government action is upheld under the Constitution. But then there's this middle category for differentiation based upon gender, which is called intermediate scrutiny, that really is the brainchild of, well, many people, but including the notorious RBG. Next slide, please. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued lots of cases involving gender equality before the US Supreme Court. And really it was about these standards of review, is what standard of review should apply to gender-based differentiation? Should it be rational basis review, or strict scrutiny, or intermediate scrutiny? So all that stuff you hear about these cases, it's really about, well, how much deference should the courts give to state and federal governments when they differentiate based upon gender? And back when I was a kid playing baseball, the Supreme Court was trying to figure that out, and it was sort of leaning toward strict scrutiny for gender-based differentiation. But that's not where we are in 2021. What the court did is it decided on intermediate scrutiny. Thank you, Alicia. In a case that Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote for the US Supreme Court after she was asked to join or appointed to the US Supreme Court after arguing all these cases. And it was a case about gender-based discrimination and admitting a student to the Virginia Military Academy Institute. And that's a public institution. So the VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, did not permit women. And so that was challenged and made its way all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court struck it down, finding that gender-based differentiation was based upon stereotypes that did not enjoy what's called an exceedingly persuasive justification. So that's an actual legal standard that when states or the federal government differentiate based on gender, the government has to have an exceedingly persuasive justification. And more recently, for example, that was put to the test in the Sessions versus Morales case that we have on the slide about differentiating between the citizenship of children who were born of unwed resident citizen mothers, but not of unwed resident citizen fathers. And the court just said there's not an exceedingly persuasive justification for that differentiation. So here's the point. Government can differentiate based on gender. It just needs an exceedingly persuasive justification. And reasonable minds can disagree or agree as to what that means. Next slide, please. Oh, there you have it, I think. Yeah, there you go. There are other applications of this exceedingly persuasive justification standard more recently in cases involving transgender-based differentiation, for example, but the U.S. Supreme Court has not yet identified or declared what the standard is in those sorts of differentiation situations. But some lower courts, so courts of appeal, have turned to the VMI standard of exceedingly persuasive justification. Next slide, please, Alicia. So that brings us to the federal law.
So that brings us to the federal law, and I just want to point out what the slide says is we don't have an ERA that's adopted as part of the United States Constitution, and there's actually widespread misunderstanding. Most people who are asked that question think we already have it. Like the overwhelming majority of people think we have it, but we don't. We don't have it. We haven't had it. It was proposed in the early 1920s, and there's been, a slow process of voting in favor of it to try to achieve the 3/4 majority of the states that is necessary to have a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And this is a picture that I think Laurie Grant had in the opening slides as well, showing you the women who were the force behind the drafting of the Equal Rights Amendment back in the 20s, and also, the campaign for trying to have it adopted. And here's, again, what the Equal Rights Amendment says. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The way this constitutional amendment was set up is that it had to be ratified by 38 states, 3/4 of the states, by a deadline. And that deadline was set for 1979 originally and then moved to 1982. And then the states started ratifying, and you can see the history of it here, right? 22 states in the early 70s, another 12 states in the mid 70s. And then we landed at the end of 1979 with 35 states. And the way the people who are supporting ERA are calling it 3 states short, right? So there's been in the last decade or two a campaign for trying to get the additional 3 states necessary to adopt or to support and say yes and vote in favor of the ERA to get us to that magic number of 38. And that just happened extremely recently, that we had Nevada in 2017, Illinois in 2018, and then finally that 38th state with Virginia's adoption very recently in 2020. So we now have 38 states who voted to adopt the amendment, but now we're having a legal controversy over, because they missed the deadline, right, by kind of a lot, because that was a long time ago. What can we do about that deadline? Can the deadline be withdrawn and overridden by Congress? Maybe it's not necessary even to do that. So there's like a lot of different schools of thought about how to deal with the fact that the deadline was not met. But a lot of people are thinking that it doesn't have to be, it's not part of the amendment itself, and that you know, it may take a legal process to come to a conclusion on the 3 states additional coming in the late, you know, the last decade. So we'll see where that goes. But it's possible to extend the deadline, and there has been support for that. I want to turn our attention just briefly, like we could talk about this for a long time, so I just wanted to fix the typo, and then just talk about what impact, like why is the ERA a useful, valuable thing? What could it bring to the table in terms of law reform and perhaps even sort of a new cultural commitment to equality? And that's what I would start to say is that the one really important thing about the ERA is actually the value statement itself, that there is a declaration that is meaningful and that people support, that there is something really important about treating women with equal human dignity to every other group. And so it's a value statement. It also becomes a bedrock principle of constitutional law if it were to be adopted. And what that means is we have some laws out there that already do provide for anti-discrimination and remedies for discrimination for women, workplace protections, but they're all adopted through legislation, right? And legislation can change, and you can have a legislator who's going to change the rules that we already have. And so what the constitutional amendment would do is to provide there being this bedrock principle of equality. It's going to be much more difficult to roll back the protections against women and the anti-discrimination provisions we have in existing law. So it's going to kind of like solidify and strengthen the laws that we do have. And that's very important because we've seen a lot of state legislatures, thinking about rolling back women's rights in a variety of different ways in recent times. The last thing I'm going to talk about is it really helps to support the fight against violence against women. So let me just give you an example. If there were systemic non-enforcement of civil restraining orders for women who are survivors of domestic violence, so if the police weren't coming when you call, right, and that was a systemic problem, which it has been historically, that could be enough to say that is a violation. It's a form of systemic discrimination against women, and there need to be laws and resources given to that problem in a way that's mandated by the Constitution, not just in the discretion of a particular jurisdiction. All right, Jim, did you want to jump in there and add anything?
Here's what a Constitution does that legislation and administrative action and policies otherwise don't do, is it sets a baseline, a normative baseline for what a country values most. So the Federal Bill of Rights in our federal Constitution is primarily about civil and political rights. But those are the rights that the framers of the Constitution and then others on amendment 26 times since then have expressed what matters most. Next slide. So we don't yet have a federal equal rights amendment, but we split the atom of sovereignty in our country. States have their own constitutions. Delaware's was the first, by the way. I just have to throw that in there for the state of Delaware, give it respect. 25 states, half of the country's states have constitutions that recognize equal rights. Wyoming's, interestingly enough, was the first, and that had something to do with statehood. And in the area, New Jersey in 1947 added its equal rights provision. It's relatively early on in this amendment process. And then many states, when they were ratifying trying to ratify the federal amendment that Alicia just spoke about, they amended their own state constitutions to incorporate equal rights, like Pennsylvania's by referendum in 1971. And then Maryland's in 1972 with this language. And then most recently, or really recently anyway, Delaware. So Delaware was actually the third state to ratify the federal amendment, and that, on its way to 38 states now. Delaware was third. For the longest time, it was the only state that had ratified the federal amendment, but didn't have an equal rights amendment of its own in its own constitution. So that was something that various legislators tried to fix over time with fits and starts, and it finally happened in 2019 with this language: the equality of rights under law shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. And that's very close to the language of the Maryland Constitution, right next door to Delaware. So next slide, please. So it passed in January of 2019. That's Vivian Longhurst, that's her back anyway, who was just so vigilant in advocating for and supporting an amendment to the Delaware Constitution to incorporate an equal rights amendment. Go ahead, Alicia, next one. And so I just want to end with this, is that, really the future of equality in the state of Delaware and across the country is bound up in this idea of an equal rights amendment. Across the globe, the single most predictive factor about all sorts of rights that are recognized, political rights, voting rights, rights to food, water, education, employment, the single most predictive thread in determining whether a country means what it says when it's advocating, when it's recognizing those rights, is whether the country has an equal rights amendment. So I think it's high time for it to be, for the United States to take a turn at it as well. It's just my closing thought on that.
Good evening to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be a member of this interesting panel. One of the things I want to start off with is
Paul, could you just pause for 1 second here?
Sure.
I just want to step in here before Judge Cardizano talks about her experiences as a judge, as a woman who came up through the bar to become a judge during a time when very few women were appointed judges. So I just wanted to sort of stop here and recap a couple of really key points. That an equal rights amendment to the Constitution was first introduced in 1920. We are now in 2022, so that's 102 years ago, that we have been asking for equal protection under the federal law. And I think both Professors Kelly and Mays went through the importance of having an equal rights amendment, what it states as far as a core value as a country, and the impact that an equal rights amendment will make. So now you're going to hear from Judge Linda Cardizano, a judge who was elected to the Court of Common Pleas in 2009. And she was at one point the chairperson of Delaware County Historical Society. So we have a very close relationship with her. So any questions, or are you ready to hear from Judge Cardizano?
Look for information, statistics on the number of judges and how many female judges we've had over the years. When I started practicing law in Delaware County, the first female judge in the county was elected in 1982. She was the only female judge in Delaware County until her retirement. And at the time, I believe we had approximately 10 to 13 judges on the bench. We now have, I'm happy to say, 8 female judges out of 21 positions. So we have really come far in the 40 years of the Delaware County bench. The slides you have here were put together by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and this lists the number of judges in different sections. We are 33% of the common law judges in Pennsylvania. That's 144 female, 294 male. Magisterial district judges, 125 women, 364 men. In the next slide, please. In the women on the bench in Pennsylvania, there are currently 13 women serving as president judge in the courts of common pleas. That is the judge in each county who presides over that board of judges. That sounds like a lot until you hear that there are 67 counties in Pennsylvania. So only 13 women. Delaware County has not had a female president judge. We do a lot better when we hit the Superior, Commonwealth, and Supreme Court. Currently, we have 3 women out of 7-member Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We are the majority on the Superior and Commonwealth courts. Superior and Commonwealth are the courts that you appeal to from the Common Pleas Court. So on Superior Court, we've almost taken over. We have 10 women, 4 men, and 1 vacancy. Commonwealth Court, we have 6 women and 3 men. Their days are numbered on those courts. The next slide, please. This is just a little information. The first woman appointed as a judge in Pennsylvania was from Allegheny County, was in Allegheny County, and she was both the county court and the court of common pleas, and that was in 1930. Next slide. We have the first elected African-American female judge in the nation. She was in Philadelphia County, the Honorable Juanita Kidd Stout, and that was in 1959. She was also the first African-American woman to serve on any state Supreme Court, and that was in 1988. So think about that. In the United States, no woman, no Black or minority woman served on a Supreme Court until 1988. The first woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania was in 1961, and she was also the first woman to serve as the Attorney General for Pennsylvania. I did find an organization called the National Association of Women Lawyers, and I wanted to give you a little bit of information concerning female lawyers in the nation. This organization has collected data for the last 13 years. They do it every 2 years. It's a national survey. They send it out to all the law firms in the nation, and they ask them to present their numbers. For the last 10 years, 50% of law school graduates are women. It's a pretty good number. When you look at the numbers on the representation of lawyers working in a firm, the associate level, which of course is the entry level, 53% are men, 47% are women. Pretty close, pretty good considering women are 50% of the graduates. The next position they looked at was non-equity partner. 69% are men, 31% are women. The highest level in a firm would be the equity partner, because then you're buying into the actual partnership itself. Those numbers aren't so good. 79% are male, 21% are women. In 2006, the number of female equity partners was 15%. 15%. 15 years later, it went up 6%. It's not really good numbers. Interestingly enough, when I looked at the survey, they indicated that these numbers are almost exactly the same as they were in the 2017-2019 survey. They talked about a term that I found fascinating. I'm not sure I understand it totally, but the basis for these numbers, the fact that when you start as an associate, they are hiring women, almost equal. But as you move through the process of either a non-equity or an equity partnership, they lose ground. And the term they used was bias interruption earlier in the hiring process. And basically what they were looking at was that earlier in the process, they put criteria in place to make the playing field more equal. They have not done that when they start to look at partnerships. That's where your glass ceiling comes into effect. I'm not sure how that gets handled. I had a lot of questions for this group as to what if they look at any other factors that go into that issue. One of the things I thought of was that to certainly buy into a law firm, you have to come up with a sum of money. If you're going to be an equity partner, you've got to put money on the table. You don't come in as an equity partner just based on your workload. That may or may not be a factor that's considered. But the concern is that women aren't moving through those ranks the way that they used to, or the way they should, I shouldn't say used to. Compensation, attorney compensation. When we talk about the same pay for the same job, they found that across the board, men made more than women. For an associate, the average attorney compensation in US dollars for men was $217,898,000. For women, it was $198,687. Non-equity partners, men were $366,805. Women, $340,643. Equity partners, $861,349. Women, $728,923. There's no explanation as to why. I couldn't find anything in the survey that told me why the male would make more. It could be the size of the firm, might have a little something to do with it. But even in those income levels, there was a difference in the pay, and I thought that was pretty significant. I will tell you that as a judge in Delaware County, I have not seen any disparity between men and women. The women are getting elected. As I said, we have 8 out of 21. Last election cycle, 3 women were elected to the bench, only 1 male. A lot of that is because I think women are more active now politically and getting more involved. And they used to tell you, the old statistics was women got a 10% bump in the polls or in the voting at election time. But I'm glad to see at least the numbers in Delaware County are moving up. And at some point we may take half or even a little majority, we'll see. So thank you.
I recognize that I'm standing on the shoulders of so many
Paul,
women,
could you pause
so
for
many
1
women who
second,
come
please?
before me, whose name.
Hi, it's Laurie again. You're about to hear from PA House Leader, Representative Joanna McClinton. Really a young African-American woman who is really making her mark and brings huge enthusiasm. And I just want to sort of recap before we go on to Joanna about the surprising statistics that Judge Cardizano spoke about. And I can tell you from my experience of working in law schools that there are more women lawyers graduating or more law students, female law students graduating than men now. And as a matter of fact, they do far better in law school, not necessarily on the bar, but they are faring better in law schools. The fact that it goes from 53% of women law school graduates to 21% of women as equity partners is really surprising. And I think that Judge Cardizano's comment about bias interruption, what that basically is similar to affirmative action to get women into law firms at the very start, at the associate level. But that bias interruption or the criteria they have in place to make sure that equal amount of women get hired or a close amount of women get hired stops along the line. It is no longer used as they move up from the associate level to the non-equity partner to the equity partner. And I think that there was a comment in the chat about Judge Cardizano talking about the compensation discrepancy between men and women and how that isn't just in the law arena. It is in the corporate arena. It is in the education arena. And one of our speakers who, if you watch the full recording on our website, is Dr. Horowitz, who started as a teacher and was one of very few superintendents. And she has some statistics on her during her talk that shows you sort of the huge drop between the amount of women who are teachers, and then it lowers to principals, and then it really drops when you get to the superintendent level. So again, I think this all demonstrates the urgency and the need, even though it's been 102 years that we've been trying to have an equal rights amendment for women. So if you're ready, this is PA House Leader Joanna McClinton, and she's really enthusiastic. And I think I saw a question about how do you get young women involved in the political process? Well, here you go. Here's an example of one.
Teams and organizations are not known, and that I'm recognizing that being a woman in leadership and serving in this moment in time, it just is a privilege. It's an honor, but the biggest key is keeping the door open so that many women, Representative O'Mara and others who are not even here yet will go sky high above me and be running that Capitol building. One day we'll have a woman governor. One day a woman who's representing us in the Senate. One day a woman of color in the congressional delegation. Pennsylvania politics has so much farther to go in terms of parity, equality, and then I'll just wrap up with these statistics. If I can find the right sheet, just so you can have a little bit of context. Yes, here it is. So these are my final comments because I know it's time for questions. There are 59 women currently in the House out of 203 members. So we're at 29%. In the Senate, there are 50 members and there are 14 women. So 28% of the Pennsylvania Senate are women. All across the country, there are 2,162 women legislators. So 25% of all lawmakers and state legislative bodies. Women of color are 7% of all state legislators, 552 out of 7,383. And the last one is, out of the 7,383 lawmakers across the country, there are only 356 that are Black women, 4.8%. So I count myself blessed, privileged, but most importantly, charged up to do work to help so many people, not just in my district, but now as the leader across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Okay, so that's what we have. As I said, we have a longer version recorded, which can be found on the Delaware County website. And I will turn this over to Kathy now.
If you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask questions. Anne, did you want to say
Yeah,
something?
hi. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Laurie. Couple of things. As the presentation was going on, as I can't help myself, I tend to do this, Googling and finding things that would go along with what was being presented. So I've been putting that in the chat, and we will take those and send out the longer link that Laurie's going to share to the presentation. But live and in person, well, not quite in person, on there, we have Joanna McClintock. So I thought maybe you would like to speak to us about what you presented in the program.
Absolutely. So glad to be here. Thank you all for
Hi, Joanne.
Joanna, how are you? Thank you for having this forum. It is really impactful that we see in so many different areas how far women have to go. I was very intrigued, not so much by my excerpt, but by the judges, because I'm also an attorney. So hearing the staggering statistics of inequities that exist on the bench across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a charge we all have to ensure that we encourage women lawyers to pursue those opportunities. And as it relates to Harrisburg, we still rank towards the bottom of the nation in representation with women. We're at 26%. And in Pennsylvania, we are 51% of the population. So we have to get better. In my caucus, we have 32 women. In the House across the aisle, there are 28 women. In the Pennsylvania Senate, with 50 senators, there are only 13 women and 0 women of color. So it is unbelievably staggering when we see the numbers and see how there is not yet real representation for the women who live in this Commonwealth. And when we see so many contentious issues, many of them involving women, we wonder, well, why are men telling women what to do and how to do it? And that is one of the reasons, is because we're not in all the rooms, as Hamilton says, where it happens. So we have to get into those rooms because we have to advocate, and we have to, most importantly, include all voices. We are better, whether we're talking about the C4 suite in corporate America or whether we're talking about the General Assembly in Harrisburg. We are better off when we include all voices. Thank you.
Joanna, I wonder if you could answer, as Laurie mentioned, one of the questions we got was, how can we get young women more interested in the political process?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Yes, I did see that in the chat. So in that regard, we have to do one of the things that I was blessed my mother always did with me, every election day, my mother took me to vote with her. Of course, I was little and couldn't even reach the levers. How many of you all remember the big levers? I'm sure you do, but she would take me every election day. Another thing that we can do is those of us who have the time and are working on campaigns or volunteering, even at events, bring women with you. And then the final thing I'd encourage you, as younger people are in high schools looking for volunteer hours, ask them to go to their local legislator's office to see if they can volunteer at events, because we have to get the interest peaked up and moving. And you all as the league know this, that our largest block of voters across the country are between the ages of 18 and 35. And so many in Generation Z are disinterested in politics. There's been a big disconnection from that turning 18, coming of age and going out to vote, being excited and enthusiastic. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But regardless of the reasons as to why young people have drifted away, we can bring them back. We can bring them back. One of the things that I do in my district, I visit every high school. The senior year students, I encourage them to register to vote, bring a tablet for them to register to vote, bring registration forms for those that want to take it home and talk it to their parents. But I feel like when I'm going, that they can have a recollection of, oh, I've met an elected official, and this is what that person, maybe not the content of the conversation, but hopefully say, I want to be it. And every school I say, when are you all going to take this job? When are you all going to say you're going to be running things in Harrisburg or City Hall or wherever? So it's a challenge because young people don't always see the benefit of government, so they're disengaged. But we have a lot of work to do to bring that back together.
Thank you. One other question that you might want to hazard a guess. When do you think Pennsylvania will elect its first women governor or senator?
Wow, that's a great question. I wish it was 2022, but based off of everyone who has filed their paperwork, we don't have women in the race, or leading the race, I should say, women leading the race. There are some women, I will not overlook them, but I haven't seen their commercials. You all know what I'm saying. They are not seeming to be front runners for governor or US Senate, but I hope that that changes. I hope that that changes in time. I mean, it is definitely something that obviously we can do anything, but there hasn't been representation, and there hasn't been even a lot of competition in recent history. So that is a lot of work. And so I say to you all, that means we've got to fill the school boards, the county councils, the borough councils, the city councils. We have to get them in a pipeline. If we don't have anyone that's obvious at the top, we don't have a quote unquote Stacey Abrams or a Secretary Clinton, we have to get one. We have to get some women postured up so that they can contend and fight for these really large opportunities at the right time. So coming soon, 2026.
Thank you. One of the other questions, and maybe Laura can answer this, how the pandemic has impacted women in the workplace, especially mothers who've had to stay home to take care of their children.
Yeah, this isn't something that the Historical Society has expertise in. There are numerous organizations out there that are gathering statistics of the impact and are still gathering because it still has an impact. But I think we've all heard that women have been leaving the workforce in record numbers due to the necessity of having a parent at home. And because there is not an equal rights amendment, many women are compensated at a lower level, even in the same position as their husbands. So when they have to make a choice of who's going to stay home, it often falls on the woman. I think we're going to see this impact last for quite a while. DCHS did create a very short video in the beginning of the pandemic, when we thought, boy, this will last, we'll all be home for about 2 weeks, maybe 3. And to our surprise, we are still in it. But what we did was interview various segments of the Delaware County population to see how it affected them. One being a stay-at-home mom whose husband traveled all the time, but her children were home from school, and now her husband was home, and they hadn't been used to having the two parents there very often, and how that impacted her. We also spoke to a leader of a non-denominational church and how much that the pandemic affected church and church attendance. We also spoke to a senior citizen and how much that affected. This was pre-vaccine at this point when we did our recording. And we spoke to a healthcare provider. So I think, the impact of the pandemic is still continuing, and it is far reaching, from children to our seniors, to women, to health caregivers, to nonprofit institutions, to just about everything. And it's global, not just national.
Thank you. One of the chat questions, Joanna, would you be able to give us any insights on what's happening with reproductive rights at the Pennsylvania state level?
Absolutely. So I was just with our governor yesterday. He came to Independence Mall to talk with many different folks from every level, from federal government, state, and local. And we were just talking about how, the leak of a draft opinion has so many people alarmed, concerned, and outraged, and very disappointed. I had a chance to speak, and the biggest thing that I feel like I said was that, when we elect presidents, of course, they have the power to choose folks to go through the Senate nomination process, but they're supposed to be interpreting laws. They're not supposed to be creating laws. That's what we do. That's what lawmakers do. We create laws, but they're supposed to interpret our laws and say if they are good or bad. And each of the folks who've joined in the last few years were very direct when they were asked repeatedly on the 50-year-old case history regarding Roe v. Wade. But nevertheless, fast forward past their confirmations and swearing ins, and here we are, waiting to see what the decision will be, what the vote will be. And then if a vote is similar to the draft and it's ruled to be unconstitutional and that the states have the power, here in Pennsylvania, we could literally be in a lot of trouble. I have a sticker in my office that says, don't make Pennsylvania Texas. And it sounds a little silly, but the truth of the matter is Governor Tom Wolf has been the only backstop to legislation that has repeatedly passed in the House and in the Senate in his entire two terms, both terms. Every year, at least one bill comes out of the House, goes to the Senate, and goes on his desk, and he vetoes it because it does, in fact, try and control the decisions of women and take away our autonomy. So I am concerned because the way our political breakup is, and I know this is totally nonpartisan, but just for information, we don't have the votes in my caucus to stop a bill like that, and they don't in the Senate. So we do have to look towards November the 8th. I know that you all have done everything possible and continue to keep folks informed about who they choose in the primary election on May the 17th. But then we'll have some really serious decisions seeing who comes out on November the 8th. If that is a priority for you, then you know how you will have to align your selections from the bottom where the state reps options are, all the way up to the top for the gubernatorial candidates.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add a little bit to that? Thank you, Joanna. Governor Casey is a self-identified pro-life Democrat. And I think that my guess is that PA will join other states in further limiting, if not outlawing, abortion. But elections matter. And the Supreme Court, if they were to overturn Roe versus Wade, doesn't prevent states from recognizing abortion rights up to and including the extent of what the federal, that Roe versus Wade contemplates. So I think we're going to see a lot of action on the state level. And as Ms. Clinton said, you know, we're worried with good reason.
Thank you. One of our members, Laura, is Laura on today? Laura Lavin actually worked on the ratification effort in North Carolina for the Equal Rights Amendment, and had offered to share some of her experiences. Is Laura there?
It looks like Laura was here, but I'm not seeing her name right now. So it looks like she dropped off, unfortunately.
Oh,
but I just did want to point out that another item I put in the chat is very recent, that the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania put together a information and possible action for people to take on reproductive rights. And I put that link in the chat, and we'll share that out again with everybody.
Okay, and one of the things that Anne also had put together and shared with us is that the League has a very long history of support for women's reproductive rights, dating back to at least the early 1980s. The League has supported the expansion of reproductive rights, both federally and statewide. The League has done extensive lobbying, co-sponsored massive marches, such as the March for Women's Lives. The League has fought attempts to allow employers and providers to impose ill-defined religious or moral objections to reproductive health services. The League believes in the individual liberties guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, and the League is convinced that the individual rights now protected by the Constitution should not be weakened or abridged. So I'm sure more will be coming from both the League of Women Voters of the US and of Pennsylvania. We don't seem to have any additional questions. So unless anyone from the chat, anyone wants to bring something further to our speakers, I would thank Laurie and Joanna, who was a delightful addition to our program, and we were excited to have you here. And I would like to remind everybody that the next League of Women Voters Hot Topic will be Friday, May 20th, and it's our civic education, one of our civic education presentations on criminal justice in Delaware County. We've got a very interesting panel. We've got Norma McLaughlin. I'm blanking on her first name, but she is the panel moderator. And then we also have Jack Solstheimer, who's the county district attorney. We have Kevin Madden, who is a member of Delaware County Council. We have Jean-Pierre Bryce, who is the Chester County or Chester City. I can't find my cheat sheet notes here right now, but a representative of Save Chester City. And the fourth person,
I think, is the new liaison between county council and the prison or the justice system.
Thanks, Kathy. So please go to lwvcdc.org and register for the programs. Again, there's no charge, but we do need your registration so we can send you the link. So, and I would once again like to thank Laurie and Joanna and Paul for putting together this program today. And it is incredibly hot topic as of this week. Anne put up several websites about the Equal Rights Amendment. And I had found, which I'll put in the chat also, a New York Times editorial called "Why Can't We Make Women's Equality the Law of the Land?" from January 28th, 2022. So I'll submit that to the chat as well. And so if there's nothing else, I thank you all for joining us and hope to see you on May 20th.
Thank you very much for
Yay.
inviting Delaware County Historical Society to participate. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Laurie and Paul, and for taking the
Thank you.
time to edit your presentation down. It was really informative. Thank you.
Thank you.